Good evening. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Eboo Patel back to Amherst. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I think most of you who are here know that Eboo Patel was born in Mumbai and grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, but if you don't know, now you do. He has said, as an American Muslim from India, that, now I'm quoting him, his adolescence was a series of rejections, one after another, of the various dimensions of his heritage, in the belief that America, India, and Islam could not coexist within the same being. If he wanted to be one, he could not be the others. End of quote. And he adds it was not until he arrived at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, that he began actively to engage in interfaith dialogues or intercultural dialogues and started to see his intersecting identities as mutually enriching rather than mutually exclusive. Also a quote. But what puzzled him, he says, was that despite the robustness of late-night conversations at college about race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, the issue of faith rarely came up. We've been talking about that at dinner. And arguing delightfully, somewhat appropriately. One of us is a little argumentative, and that was me. Okay. Eboo says that his classmates didn't seem willing to discuss the ways in which their religions affected their identities and their worldviews, and were reluctant, perhaps, to engage personally or in nuance in what had become in the United States a divisive public conversation about religion. So if religion was a divisive conversation in the US when Eboo was at Illinois, it's become even more so since. Eboo Patel has dedicated his life to considering the complicated place of faith in American identity and in identity generally, and the ways in which our perceptions of religious difference affect the society and the world around us. He seeks to articulate the richness that comes from religious diversity, the degree to which pluralism, including religious pluralism, is key to democracy, and he's devoted his life to training next generations of interfaith leaders to carry on what he calls the sacred work of embracing shared values of our faith traditions. Because he believes in young, open-minded students and other youth, because he believes that you all are so critical to promoting interfaith cooperation, in 2002, Eboo founded the Interfaith Youth Core. The Interfaith Youth Core is a nonprofit that works with colleges and universities across the country to educate tomorrow's leaders in the principles of religious pluralism and to turn religious diversity into a positive force for democracy. And over the last 15 plus years, the Interfaith Core has worked with more than 200 institutions, including Amherst, to empower a generation who can make religious pluralism a social norm. Eboo provides an inspiring role model of activism informed by intellectual rigor. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University. He's the author of 2 influential books, Sacred Ground, Pluralism, Prejudice, and the Promise of America, 2012, and Acts of Faith, The Story of an American Muslim, The Struggle for the Soul of a Generation, from 2010. By the way, there are books outside on a table that he's offering for free.
You're offering for free.
That's what I meant.
You are offering for free. Took me blood, sweat, and tears. It'll cost you $20 each.
Okay, so we paid for them, but they're free to you. Now, but please don't run out there now to get the last ones. Hopefully there'll still be some left. Good. I'm really glad that you didn't provide them and give them away. Yeah, you're welcome. Eboo Patel is a regular contributor, as many of you will already know, to the Washington Post, USA Today, the Huffington Post, NPR, CNN, and many other outlets. President Barack Obama recognized his contributions by inviting him to serve on the Inaugural Advisory Council of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He was also an Ashoka Fellow, part of a select group of social entrepreneurs identified as changing the world. He's won many other awards and honors. And before I turn the microphone over to him, I just want to thank a few people and offices. First, the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life and the Religion Department for sponsoring tonight's event. And I'd like to take this opportunity, since he's going to retire at the end of this year, to thank the head of Religious and Spiritual Life, Paul Sorrentino. Paul, where are you? Paul remains with us through the rest of the academic year, but there are very few public opportunities to thank him for all he's done for Amherst and for religious life at Amherst, and so I wanted to take this opportunity. I also want to thank the generous support of the Schremm Fund, which was established in 1991 to expose students to scholars and public figures who have demonstrated moral purpose and who've acted with responsibility toward others. There couldn't be a better example than Eboo Patel. Eboo, welcome back. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So when I was younger, I used to really like long, glowing introductions, but I've now been doing this long enough to know that when you hear an introduction like that and then you see me, you're like, really, that dude? So my hope is that some of you will take a free book after I finish with you over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So college is where I learned to think about identity. Give you a couple of scenes from my years at the University of Illinois in the early to mid 1990s. So my the memory that I have of first being on campus was the basketball court. So I walk into the gym, it's like my second day at the University of Illinois, and there's 3 games going on. There's a black game, an Asian game, and a white game. And I start walking over to the white game. And I stop and I look back at the black dudes and the Asian dudes, and I literally say in my mind, over here, they'll let us play. And then I stop again and I look back and I kind of realize these guys are kind of happy in their own games. You know, the games are each a little different, little different rhythm and flow in the games. It's 3 different games. And I'm like, why am I walking over to the white game? And I have this other moment. I'm like, is my life kind of contained in this metaphor? Have I been trying to get in the white game my whole life? And at that point, I was done trying to play basketball. I just stopped and walked out of the gym. I was like, I gotta go think about this, right? So here's what was interesting to me about being an undergrad in the early mid-1990s was that thought didn't remain my dirty little secret. And it's not like identity and race hadn't crossed my mind ever as a kid, right? But I thought I was the only one who thought about that stuff. So after a couple days of obsessing about it personally and recognizing that there's no public conversation about this, I just kept on trying to play in the white game. But back in 1993, at least at the University of Illinois, and my sense is that a lot of colleges and universities across the country, race, identity, diversity, it was part of the rhythm and the flow of a lot of parts of the campus. And so I found myself in a public conversation about those kinds of issues. Now here's the second scene. So 93 is the year that Amy Tan's Joy Luck Club gets made into a film. So I go see this film with a couple of guys from my residence hall. And I literally feel watching this movie like it's the first time that my life has been depicted, right? It's an Asian American family, successive generations, and it's the pressure that parents put on younger generations to succeed. But it's also the texture of love in those families, right? So, this one of these Chinese American girls has this rivalry with another Chinese American girl, and the families use these two girls as like proxies in their battle for status, right? And so I'm like, this is me and my friend Karthik growing up in high school, right? So I'm watching this, and then at the end, when it's really clear that the other Chinese American girl, she went to Amherst, right? Et cetera, et cetera. You liked that, didn't you? Yes. Right? And the protagonist of the film is, kind of has to accept her like not as, going to Williams status, let's call it, right? But then her mom tells her at the end of the film, you have best quality heart. I was like, it's like, just like I was, and the lights go up, and the four guys I went to this movie with, they're like, that was dumb, let's go get Taco Bell. And I'm like, did you not watch the same movie? And then of course I was like, oh yeah, right? Like I'm different. I grew up in this house. And part of what's interesting about that movie is that it's a movie about daughters. And the intensity of that mother-daughter relationship, the gender dimensions of it, that was new to me, right? So there's parts of the film I related to, and there's parts of it that was an education for me about gender, right? And I recognize, like, this is my life, and it's not your experience. And actually, I've watched 500 movies in my life, and this is the first one that I've seen about me. And you just don't have a reference point for it, right? So that year, Philadelphia, the film dropped also. I go see Philadelphia, which is a story about a gay couple, one of whom's part of a law firm in Philadelphia. He contracts AIDS, and it's the story of that relationship. By the way, Angels in America drops that time also, and I go see that actually 3 times. So there's like this surfeit of films and plays on gay issues in America. And I'm watching Philadelphia, and I'm at Angels in America. I literally go see it 3 times. I'm so taken by it, right? And I have this memory of being a senior in high school and joking with my friends in at the basketball court that my friend Karthik and I, the Indian American kid who's my kind of rival, he went to Williams, I went to, was my rival, that we had chosen each other as roommates because we didn't want to get assigned a fag. And I'm watching Philadelphia, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm the bad guy in this movie. I'm the jerk in this movie. And that wasn't my fear. I was afraid that no one would like me. So I chose a friend from high school as a roommate because at least I'd have one person. But I blamed it on gay people. I was the bad guy. But it took that movie, it took Angels in America for me to be like, yeah, that's me. So I'm in the computer lab typing a paper, and sociology paper, and my fingers are going like this over the keyboard. I type 50 words a minute. And there's a girl who's also in my sociology class who's made a lot of comments in class that I've learned from. I was taken by her. She's very, very smart. And she's typing the same paper. She's going like this. And I look over at her, and I kind of chuckle. And she looks at me, and she's like, hey, how many computers were there in your school? I'm like, I don't know, two computer labs? And she's like, yeah, we had 3 computers in the whole school. So sorry I didn't learn how to type as fast as you know how. So all of a sudden, like, I have this recognition that, you grow up professional middle class, it comes with a certain set of invisible privileges, right? Things that you don't even realize, like required typing classes in high school because 90% of the high school graduating class goes to college. So they just require it sophomore year for everybody. College is the first time I'm thinking about these identities in a way where I have a chance to talk about them publicly with folks. And I mean, let's put it this way. I drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like, I am that guy on campus. You cannot talk to me about a light subject. I am going to talk to you like, we are going to talk about socialism, right? We're going to talk about bell hooks. We're going to talk about the banking model. I was that guy, right? And my parents, when they dropped me off at college, they were glad that they were only 2.5 hours away. By the time I was like 6 lectures in, long diatribes on my dad's absence of people of color consciousness. My dad's like, yeah, kind of wish you had gone to college on the East Coast. That way we would do less laundry and I would get less lectures. Right? My dad actually told me at one point, if you use the word bourgeois in this house one more time, you can find some other bourgeois dad to pay your bourgeois college tuition, right? So why don't you go hand that back to your sociology professors? Okay. Mostly he was good-natured about identity issues, right? And I mean, he would say to me, he's like, newsflash to Mr. Eboo Patel. You're not the first person to have thought about these things, even though you think you invented it, right? Like I was one of like 4 brown people amongst the gray snows and white Catholics of the University of Notre Dame in 1975, right? Like I was like literally the first Indian American to be at a senior level in corporate advertising in the Midwest in the 90s. Yes, you have thoughts and you have an experience, but you're not the first person, right? So just take a chill for a minute, right? So we'd have some of those conversations. But the sharpest one was when my dad said to me, Eboo, for all you talk to me about people of color consciousness, right? For like the umpteenth time that you have said that, the gravest sin you can think of the last several months is that Denzel Washington did not get the Oscar for Malcolm X, who, by the way, was assassinated, martyred, I think, 35 years ago today? Something like that. Today's the anniversary. I just read that on Imam Zaid Shakir's Twitter feed. For as much as you talk about that, you don't talk about other important identity issues. And I just want to point that out to you, right? You're like 7 clicks into Judith Butler's footnotes, but you've never once talked about religious identity or religious conflict. So the next time you want to come up here and lecture me about people of color consciousness, you first tell me how you're going to solve religious conflict. And I did a very good job of making sure my dad saw me roll my eyes. This is actually like a really important drama move. Not only do you roll your eyes, you make sure your parents watch you do it so they know exactly what you think, right? Then I got back in the Oldsmobile that my dad had given me to drive back to the campus where my dad was paying my college tuition to think and talk about what a 19th century dinosaur my father was. I mean, who talked about religion at the end of the 20th century? Seriously. My girlfriend at the time is Jewish. This is the fall of 1995. And a couple days later, I get a phone call. And I can hear the tears in her throat. And she says, Yitzhak Rabin has just been assassinated. And a couple things were interesting to me at the time, right? One was that as I followed that news story, and my dad was right. Like I read a lot of Judith Butler's footnotes, but I never looked at the front pages of the New York Times. I didn't know what was happening in current events. Just didn't know. But I followed this story, right? So when the assassin was arraigned in court, and the judge said, "Did you have an accomplice?" He said, "Yes, God." Little scales fell from my eyes. Right? So how is it that religious identity is playing some role in major world affairs, and this is not the only one. You treat that as a window and not a one-off event. Treat that as a window into some of the current events dynamics of the 1990s. And what you'll find is, frankly, there's religious identity tensions and conflicts everywhere. First World Trade Center bombing was 1993. Mid-1990s, the bombing of the USS Cole. Late 1990s, the bombings of the embassies in Tanzania and in Kenya. My uncle is a diplomat in Kenya. He is still alive because he was 10 minutes late to work that day. This is the announcement of the global ambitions of Muslim extremism. It doesn't start on September 11th. It starts in the 90s. Actually, it starts earlier than that, but we in the quote-unquote West see the visible manifestations first in the 90s. Muslims aren't the only ones who are the attackers. So one of the most intractable wars of the 1990s is in the Balkans. What is the nature of the Balkans War? Well, as some of my Bosnian Muslim friends have recounted, they would see Serbian soldiers roll tanks through Sarajevo holding up the number 3. You know what the 3 stood for? The Trinity. As in, we Christians are going to destroy, we Trinitarians are going to destroy you Muslims. In Muslim prayer, you lift up the number 1. Lift up your index finger. It stands for one God. Ahad, one God. 3, we Trinitarians are you going to destroy you Muslims. Late 1990s, the election of the BJP, a Hindu nationalist party in India, one of their early moves, nuclear test. What do they call it? The Hindu bomb. Pakistan responds, nuclear test. What do they call it? The Muslim bomb. How is it that I have 7 hours worth of identity and diversity conversations every day in classes, over meals, at midnight, and religious identity and diversity has come up, 3 times in my entire college career? And all around, religious identity and diversity issues are exploding. What's the most influential foreign affairs book and article of the 1990s? Sam Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. What is the core thesis of the Clash of Civilizations? That in a post-communist era, we are not going to enter into what Fukuyama calls the end of history and everybody's going to embrace liberal democracy. We're going to enter into an era of civilizational conflict. And what is the civilization principally based upon? Religious identity. You don't have to believe it's true to recognize it's significant. How is it that we in our identity and diversity conversations at the University of Illinois in the mid-1990s were paying zero attention to this? By the way, that's quantified, that's like an accurate quantification. That's not a metaphor. 0. So my girlfriend took the Rabin assassination hard. And one of the things that's interesting to me about that is our first conversations about the importance of religious identity to her happened around that. Of course, I knew she was Jewish. Didn't really know how important it was to her. For all of the public conversations we were having about identity and diversity in college, even in romantic relationship, in intimate relationship, didn't include a fulsome conversation about the religious identity of one of the partners. Now, something about that has to do with personality, but something about that has to do with the nature of the public discourse. By the way, it wasn't just that situation. So, my RA training when I was at the University of Illinois, it's 2 weeks long, it's before school starts, and literally half of it is given over to identity and diversity issues. And literally none of that half is about religious identity. So we have RA training every Tuesday night during the course of the school year, 7 to 9 after dinner. all the RAs gather and you go through some kind of professional development. So we did kind of a typical exercise. One of these Tuesdays, talk about the time when you felt marginalized because of your identity. So people are telling powerful stories about feeling marginalized because they're poor, because they're black, because they're Latino, because they're native, because they're gay. Powerful stories. Gets to my friend Kizzer. Kizzer tells the story about how in the dining hall a couple weeks ago, it was midterms, and a bunch of students were blowing off steam by having what they called a Viking dinner, which involved going to the food line, getting a bunch of food, mashed potatoes, peas, roast chicken, jumping up on tables and like smearing the food on each other, and then going back and getting more, right? And a couple of the RAs kind of chortled and chuckled because they had participated. They thought it was fun. They're blowing off steam. So Kizzer's like, lets people do their chortling and chuckling, and he just says like, calm as a cucumber, right? He says, it was offensive to me. Like I couldn't eat in the dining hall that day. I had to take my food to my room and eat because, for me, food is life and life is from God, and you just don't mess with that. It's what we Muslims believe. And I look around at the other RAs, and they're not hostile. They're just blank. They just don't know what to do with that. When somebody registers being Latino or being gay or being poor, folks have a radar. They know what to do with it. Somebody registered being Muslim, they just didn't know what to do with it in public. It's not, this is Champaign, Illinois in the mid-1990s. It's not like some of these people aren't privately religious. But to register your religious identity when somebody has said, tell me a story of when you felt marginalized or uncomfortable, that just, people didn't know what to do with it. I walk past one of the quads in my residence hall. There's 4 beds in there, and there's like a little social suite area. And I hear music coming out of the quad. Door is slightly ajar, and I kind of peek my head in. And there's like 20 kids in this circle, and they're singing. And it's beautiful. So I kind of listen a while, and it's like a Christ is our King song. In a nice 5 minutes, and I kind of walk away, and I see one of the girls in the circle in class, and I say, I'm like, what was that? And she's like, oh, that's my Christian student group. I'm like, there's 20 of you? She's like, yeah. Meet every Wednesday night? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, wow, 20 Christians, that's pretty good. And she's like, oh no, there's 50 small groups of 20 on the that was our residence halls group. And we're actually a small group. There's like, some of the groups have like 70 kids. And I'm like doing the math. I'm not really good at math, but I'm doing like the 50 times 50. I'm like, that's a lot of students. Why is it that in my RA training, they showed us a map of the campus, and they showed us where the LGBT center was, and where the African American center was, and where the Women's Resource Center was, but they didn't show us where the university offices were? What? Do you not count? Are you not an identity group? I mean, by the numbers, you appear to me pretty large. I'd been part of a group of Asian Americans who was out in the quad protesting for an Asian American house. There was a Latino house, an African American house. We needed ours too, right? I was out in the quad protesting about just about everything I could, by the way. But this was one of the fun ones. This was especially fun, right? So we'd done well if we could get 40 kids on the quad. I mean, if the university group really wanted to mobilize, they could get 50 small groups of 30 or 40 students each on every Wednesday night. What would that look like? Why don't they get a professor? Is there not an evangelical history in America, both by population and by identity lens? I was really involved in social justice work in college, and I started reading King. And the line that stood out to me about King when I was 19 or 20 was this: many people want to make of me many things, but in the deep recesses of my heart, I'm a Christian. My commitment to Jesus as the Son of the living God is the highest commitment that I have, higher than race or nation or creed. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking two things. Number one, what is Martin Luther King Jr. minus the Christianity? Do we talk about him today? If you see the film Selma, when King gets despondent, he calls Mahalia Jackson and he says, "Sing me a gospel song." What is Martin Luther King Jr. without the Christianity? When King is at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and he looks across the bridge and there's 100 police officers with their truncheons ready for his skull, and he doesn't know what to do, he kneels and he prays. What is Martin Luther King Jr. without the Christianity? How come nobody told me until I was 20 years old about the Christianity? How come I went through Martin Luther King Jr. days since I was in first grade? It was always Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but not Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. How do you understand Martin Luther King Jr. minus the Christianity? It's a lie. It's just not true. It's like saying he's not black. It was that big a part of who he was by his own statements. How do you understand American history without attention to religious identity? When John Winthrop rolls into Massachusetts Bay around 1630, he declares that it is going to be a bulwark against the Antichrist. Who's the Antichrist? The Pope. America was launched as an anti-Catholic project. What makes Roger Williams unique as a figure in American life? He's deeply Christian. He arrives at Massachusetts Bay as a minister. He disagrees with John Winthrop's view that a sin is a crime, which is to say that what the church views as a sin, the civil authority should punish as a crime. He disagrees with the Puritan project of sameness. One of Roger Williams' great lines is, why can't the Jew, the Muslim, the Quaker, the Catholic be viewed as a good citizen? Have they not been good citizens in other times and places? What is it that makes us think that they cannot be good citizens in the here and now? The beginnings of America as an anti-Catholic project, the beginnings of America as a nation that puts a stake in the ground for religious freedom and religious diversity. Who continues path number 2? Well, when Moses Sessions sees the Constitution ratified, the first president elected, he wonders what's going to happen to his people in this new nation. He sends a message to George Washington. Dear Mr. Washington, congratulations on your election. We Jews have been hated and hounded and harassed for generations, centuries actually. What's going to be the fate of my people in this new United States of America? First of all, what does this mean? In the late 18th century, not far from here, there's a Jewish community, about 2,000. What does George Washington say in a great American document called A Letter to the Hebrew Congregation of Newport, Rhode Island? My government will give to bigotry no sanction and to persecution no assistance. May the children of the stock of Abraham sit in safety under their own vine and fig, let there be none to make them afraid. He ends that document with this line: may the Lord of all mercies scatter light and not darkness, make each of us useful in our own vocations and happy in his own everlasting way. How come nobody taught me that in high school? How come nobody referred to that? How do I call myself an educated person without knowing that the first president of the United States guarantees to a Jew asking about the safety of his people protection? The term Judeo-Christian has a fascinating history. It was given to Moses by God on Sinai. That's a joke. Here's that history. In 1928, a guy named Al Smith, who's the governor of New York, is the first Catholic to be a major party candidate for the office of the presidency. This is the era of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan is no small organization. It's 3 to 4 million people. It is anti-black. It is anti-Semitic. It is anti-Catholic. It vows to torch Al Smith's campaign, and it wins. Al Smith's campaign goes down in an inferno of anti-Catholic flames. And a group of Americans decides, no way, not again. They call themselves the National Conference on Christians and Jews. It's priests, it's ministers, it's rabbis, and they come together to start things called tri-faith conversations. They go all across the country, to military bases, to college campuses, to local communities. They talk about the similarities between Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. And as they do these civic programs, retail style, right? Like community by community, campus by campus, military base by military base, they realize that part of what they need is a new narrative for America. You know, that great liberal lion, Franklin Roosevelt, says, America is a Protestant nation. Jews and Catholics are here under sufferance. That lasts like well into the early part of the 20th century. So the folks at the NCCJ, they need a new narrative. They invent a term, Judeo-Christian. It wasn't written into the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't part of Lincoln's second inaugural. It is literally a made-up term of a group of civic activists, a group of interfaith leaders in the 1930s who are not principally concerned about being historically accurate. Ask somebody who knows about Jewish history how well Jews have done in Christian civilization from the beginning. It's not especially theologically accurate. Our recent president highlighted that when he said, I am vouching for the Judeo-Christian origins of the United States. We are a Judeo-Christian nation. Everybody will be saying Merry Christmas. I will pause 10 seconds so you can make your own joke. But theological and historical accuracy wasn't the objective. The objective was to expand the American idea to welcome the communities and contributions of Jews and Catholics. And to that end, they were so successful that we forget the history of the term. We think we found it on Plymouth Rock when the Pilgrims arrived. But all of these things, King's Christian commitment, John Winthrop's anti-Catholic diatribes, Roger Williams standing up for the separation of church authority and civil authority, speaking openly about religious diversity, George Washington telling Jews they will be protected in America, the NCCJ responding to the KKK and launching the idea of a Jew. This is all a part of what we inherit. Look, when I was in high school, I read exactly 2 things by a black writer, 2 poems by Langston Hughes. I had no idea that there was a Richard Wright, that there was a Ralph Ellison, that there was a Toni Morrison. No idea. Never heard of James Baldwin. Never heard of this thing called the African American canon. It was in college that I took a required minority cultures course and was like, oh my gosh, look at this massive contribution to American life and letters by black folks. University of Illinois makes a decision. You can't graduate from here in liberal arts and sciences and call yourself an educated person unless you have some familiarity with the African American canon. So, what's the definition of an educated person when it comes to religious identity and religious diversity? Should you have some familiarity with the Christian convictions of Martin Luther King Jr.? Some knowledge of the letter to the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island? Should you have heard of Moses Sessions? Should you know why Roger Williams is famous? Should you know that when the Know Nothing Party emerges in the middle of the 19th century with a single plank in its platform that Catholics do not belong in America, they elect 75 people to Congress in the 1850s. They dominate state legislatures, including the state legislature of Massachusetts, with entirely write-in candidates. That a young congressman from Illinois stands up against them, a guy named Abe Lincoln. Are these not signature parts of American history? To be an educated person, what ought you know about the religious dimensions of our history? What ought you know about the religious traditions of other people? I was at a liberal arts college in the Midwest some years back, and I'm putting the polish on my talk. I'm in the student center, chattering students, bunch of TVs, some are showing sports, some are showing the news, and there's this news story on some Muslim extremist incident, right? So of course they've got, they give these guys free airtime, right? I always say, like, if you're a toothpaste company and you want a commercial, you got to pay $50,000 to get your 30 seconds. But if you're an extremist, all you got to do is bomb something and send the tape to CNN, and they'll play it for free. They advertise you for free. So they're doing that. They're advertising some crazy Muslim extremist. And so I see these two dudes finishing their burgers and fries, and they're looking at this news story with this crazy Muslim extremist guy, rattling away about something, right? And these two Muslim girls kind of pass, and they're in hijab, and they're talking to each other. And these two dudes look at these Muslim girls, look at the TV, this ranting and raving Muslim extremist, look back at the Muslim girls, and one says to the other, maybe they're related. And it was interesting the way he said it. It wasn't deliberately prejudiced. It was like, the only knowledge I have about Islam is on that TV. That's what I know. So when I look at you, I think that. What else is he supposed to think? Who's taught him different? I mean, does he learn about Islam in high school? Has he heard about the Conference of the Birds, the great poem by Farida Din Attar, in college? Does he read poems by Rumi? Does he know about the life of the Prophet? Does he know that Muhammad Ali was a Muslim? Does he know that the Sears Tower and the Jan Hancock Building were designed by Muslims? If that's what he knows, why wouldn't he think that about his classmate? What do you need to know about other religious traditions to call yourself an educated person? Not everything, but I would think something. What do you need to be able to do when it comes to religious diversity? To be a competent professional. There's a great book called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Anybody know that book in this? It's a great book, right? It's the story of this little girl named Leanne Liu. And 12, 15 months old, she starts to shake uncontrollably. And her parents take her to the local hospital, and the doctors run all the kind of tests that you expect high-quality doctors to run on this little girl, and they, unsurprisingly diagnose her as epileptic. And they figure out some, regime of of drugs that her parents are supposed to take. And parents don't give the girl the drugs. Every couple of weeks, they bring her back in to had another seizure, and they need her sedated, and they bring her home, and they don't follow the doctor's orders. And the writer of this book goes alternate chapters. The doctor's point of view, we're doing all this work for this little girl, and the parents aren't even treating her. And the parents' point of view, they are part of a religious tradition that we Westerners would call shamans. And they believe that while there is something certainly medically challenging about their little girl going through uncontrollable shaking, there is something possibly spiritually magnificent about it. Because senior shamans in the Hmong community are prepared by shaking when they're young. Is their daughter being prepared by the divine to be a shaman? The doctors are mad at the parents. The parents are mad at the doctors. Every time they go in, the doctors yell at them about not giving their daughter these drugs. They never ask the parents what they are doing. The rare herbs that they have purchased back in Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand that they have put in an amulet around their daughter's neck. The animals they've sacrificed behind their apartment building and said the ritual prayers to trade their spirits for the spirit of their daughter that they believe has been captured. The doctors get so angry at one point, they call out California foster care services. So imagine this. You're a Hmong family, refugee family. You've been in this country for 10 years. Your English is still challenged. Your daughter is going through this difficult situation. It's possibly spiritually magnificent, but man, it sure is tough on the family. You go to this hospital, the doctors kind of do their thing, but they're stone-faced, and when they're not stone-faced, they yell at you. The doctors do a bunch of stuff you really wish they wouldn't do, like put your little girl to sleep, right, with injections, and you think to yourself, don't you know that that's how evil spirits enter? But the doctors never ask, and you would have a hard time explaining it anyway. And now here's California Foster Care Services show up at your door, and they take your girl away. You can't even tell them to stop. You don't know. Your English isn't good enough. And the doctor's like, what are we supposed to do? Right? This is an abuse and neglect situation. What are we supposed to do? So the anthropologist that writes this book, she gets access to the medical file of this little girl, Leanne Liu. She goes through it, right? Like every intake, every procedure, she gets to the first form, the admittance form, the original admittance form. And on that form, there's a category called religion. And the person who's done the admittance, the intake, has marked none. So tell me something. What do you do if you're a doctor in that hospital? How are you going to navigate that situation? Let's say you actually know the family is Hmong and shaman. You don't believe that the principal issue here is that their daughter's spirit has entered another world and the family needs to do animal sacrifices to trade spirits. But the family believes that. You don't believe that rare herbs from Laos are going to help their daughter stop shaking. But the family believes that. You don't believe in religion at all. The family does. So what do? You lecture the family. You tell them their shaman beliefs are, well, not relevant in this situation, even though they think that their daughter might be being prepared for something spiritually grand. What do you do? So here's my hope, right? Because I don't know what you do. That's a really tough situation. But by the way, whatever your religious identity is, they have a religious identity. You see what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to think religion is important for them to think religion is important. And if you're their doctor, you better figure out how to talk to them. better figure out how to have that conversation. And I really hope the first time you think about that is not when you're faced with an 18-month-old Hmong girl having seizures. I really hope that the first time you think about that is here at Amherst, that you read that book, that you wonder what it's going to be like to be a doctor in that situation. By the way, maybe you're thinking to yourself, I'm probably not going to be working in a place with a lot of Hmong shamans. That might be true. Tell you something, if you're going to be a doctor, you can deal with a lot of end-of-life situations in which family member A says, Grandpa always said that he didn't want to live on life support, and family member B has become a more serious, committed, and conservative Christian over the past decade and says God decides when he takes Grandpa, don't remove life support. How do you deal with that? I imagine you revert to policies and procedures at some point, but you got to say something to the family, right? And person A, maybe you agree with person A. Grandpa said didn't want to be on life support. Brain scan goes flat. Grandpa's gone. But you got to say something to person B. What are you going to say to person B? I really hope the first time you think about that is not when you walk into that room. I love college campuses precisely because they're practice for the public. Because you can think about those issues here first. You can work through those cases here first. So when you walk into that end-of-life room, when you see Leanne Lu shaking in the waiting room of the hospital, you think to yourself, I've at least thought of this. You're not me at 20 getting the phone call from his girlfriend saying, Yitzhak Rabin has just been assassinated, and wondering, so why is that any more significant than some other world leader being assassinated? You realize that religious identity and diversity issues, they're everywhere. They're like significant social capital in Houston after Harvey. Tell me something. How does Houston recover after Harvey without churches and synagogues and mosques? Seriously. Who do you think is housing people? Who do you think is feeding people? Who do you think is organizing disaster relief teams? I got family in Houston. They're like, man, there's never been more interfaith cooperation in this city than now. Let's say you're in the Red Cross. You're assigned to Houston after Harvey. Man, you better know how to weave together the social capital of sanghas and gurdwaras and Jain temples and mosques and churches and synagogues. Because they're the folks who do the work, right? Let's say you run a Park District pool in Brooklyn. Orthodox Jewish women walk in and they say, look, we can't swim around men. We need our own swimming hours. You're a co-ed pool. You've always been a co-ed pool. 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're co-ed. They're asking for a religious identity exception. Do you grant them swimming hours? When? At a prime time? 8 a.m. on Saturday mornings? What if it was a group of Orthodox Jewish men that walked in and said, look, we can't swim around women. Can you grant us male-only swimming hours? What if the request is by women, but requested by a male rabbi on behalf of a group of women who remain silent in the meeting? What if, true story, this is a mostly black neighborhood, and the way it looks is the white people are asking for special stuff again? True story. I hope the first time you think about that is not when you're the head of that park district pool. This stuff is really hard. That's why it belongs at colleges. Where else do you gather massive intellectual resources? People with depth knowledge in religious traditions, in American history. Where else are you able to present multidimensional cases and wrestle through them? Get the answer wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong, and then a little closer to something that you can live with. Because I promise you, there is no easy answer to any of these situations. Where else do you gather the kind of young leadership and academic talent that you all represent in this room, where there are Muslims and Jews and secular humanists and evangelicals and Catholics and Jains and Buddhists, and you're all together? And so somebody's like, you know what? Look, I know what it's like to be an Orthodox Jewish woman and to not be able to swim. So I feel for these folks. Somebody else is like, well, I know what it's like to grow up in a black neighborhood and to like have other people get their own stuff all the time in my neighborhood. So you get to have the conversation here. This is your laboratory. This is your launching pad. This is where you think about it first. Practice for the public. You know what else is special about a place like Amherst? Paul Sorrentino. I'm serious. I'm going to end with a story about Paul. And it's a story about Amherst. So one of the most influential young rabbis in America is a guy named Josh Stanton. Amherst class of what, 2008? So Josh comes to Amherst. He's an athlete. You know, he's going to be a banker and a consultant, something like that, right? You come to Amherst to do that, right? Master of the universe. So Josh does his econ thing. I mean, it's all right. Not super into it. But he's there early on Friday nights for Shabbat dinner. And he helps prepare the meal, and he helps set the table. He's there late. He cleans up. And there's a guy hanging around Religious Life Center on Friday nights. And he's paid attention to Josh. Kind of gets a sense like this, athlete, econ major guy. He kind of mopes around the quad, but he comes to life on Friday nights. So the evangelical Christian guy sidles up to Paul one of those Friday nights, and he's like, hey, man, you ever thought about doing this, Jewish preparation thing for a career? I mean, you ever thought about being a rabbi? And the way Josh tells me the stories, he's like, I mean, you don't really go to Amherst to be a rabbi, right? Really? But you know what's special about this place is that Paul notices Josh. Josh didn't set up office hours with Paul. Paul noticed Josh. You pay attention to young people here. You pay attention to their inclinations, to their instincts, to their possibilities. You invite them into that. You're the kind of place where Josh Stanton begins his path to the rabbinate, because you're the kind of place where Paul Sorrentino is allowed to notice kids and to say, hey, you ought to think about becoming this. These places, right? These people, they're the jewels of American civilization, really. Andy Del Banco, in this great little book called College, he says, look, in any list of the great achievements of American civilization, you put jazz there, you put baseball there, you put the Constitution there. On any list, you're going to have the American Liberal Arts College. It is one of the great achievements of the American people. And one of the reasons for that is because people like Paul notice people like Josh and help him become who he was meant to be. Thank you. You guys were so like somber through that. All right, I think we got a few minutes for questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, two comments briefly. So I used to do a lot of Israeli-Palestinian peace work, and there are sort of two ways of framing that. One is there's sort of Jews and Arabs, and the other often is Jews and Muslims. And of course, a lot of Arabs, Palestinians, others are Christian. But so I remember one talk about like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with a very learned Jewish scholar, a very learned Muslim scholar. And I remember talking afterward to a secular Palestinian American and also secular Jew who felt really alienated because they thought like, okay, this conversation is pitched in religious terms that I don't necessarily identify with. So I think that like there's always that question. The other point you made, and I like the point about Judeo-Christian. So one of the problems with Judeo-Christian as a term, even though it's well-intentioned, is that it's in many respects intellectually dishonest, and it's also a choice, because everyone knows, or not everyone, but people who really know that Orthodox Judaism is really much more like Islam than any other religion, and liberal Judaism is really much more like Protestantism. So in that sense, a term like Judeo-Christian is actually within, say, a Jewish spectrum, a choice about what kind of Judaism you mean. So I think that therefore, there is in the question of inclusiveness also the question of what one excludes. I think it's a complicated dialectic. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. I have two responses to your two questions. I will take the second one first. I would prefer to be a Jew in America in 1955 rather than 1925. One of the reasons for that is because of the work that the term Judeo-Christian did. So there's a great line, all models are wrong, some models are useful. I think the word that, I don't know who wrote that, but did somebody who wrote that? I really want to know who wrote that. That is a great line. That is a great line. I also think that the term Judeo-Christian's good work is largely up, right? I think we need a new narrative. But I would much rather be a Jew in America or a Catholic in America in 1955 than 1925 because of the work Judeo-Christian did, right? And so in that way, it moved the country a little bit forward. And if, my great hope is that somebody 100 years from now is critiquing a theory that I had that they think is inadequate, right? Because that means it will have done some work for 50 years, right? So that's how I feel. Second thing is, it doesn't matter what the religion of the doctors is in the spirit catches you and you fall down situation. It matters what the religion of the patients are. What I mean by that is the question isn't, are you in this frame? The question is, can you deal with the medical, educational, civic, judicial, whatever situation before you? I think one of the great, what I'm trying to do is to shift the category of we should care about identity principally to the extent that we feel included in that identity category. I think that matters, but it's not the only frame, right? Does it matter your own faith identity if you're the head of a park district pool when a group of Orthodox Jewish women come in and request female-only swimming hours? Or is it incumbent upon you as a competent professional in that situation to wonder about their religious identity and to be educated and competent in that? Does it matter what your religious identity is vis-a-vis King's Christian commitment or John Winthrop or George Washington? You see what I'm saying? Like, I would like to shift the frame or to introduce a frame of not, do I see myself in this situation, but can I deal with other people when I am a professional or a citizen in this situation? It might well be that you think religion poisons everything. That is your right. And if you are working for the Red Cross in Houston after Harvey, and you decide that because you think religion poisons everything, you're not going to deal with church, mosque, synagogue, temple, gurdwara groups, who are like the ones housing and helping and doing soup kitchen work, tell me what other forms of social capital you're going to work with. Right? You might think, I mean, one could go on and on and on and on, but the fact is, American civil society, our healthcare systems, our educational systems, our refugee resettlement agencies, our social work systems, our disaster relief systems are largely run by faith communities. So the question is, are you going to be able to work with them? Part of that question is, what's your own identity? But I think a bigger part is, are you going to be good at it? Honestly, right? Like, if I'm like in Houston after Harvey and you're working for the Red Cross, are you good at it? Are you good at building partnerships between churches, synagogues, and mosques?
The fastest growing faith affiliation in the United States is unaffiliated. It's growing by millions every year. Pew and PRRI looked at American faith associations in 2007 and then again just 7 years later in 2014, and found that there was a hockey stick trend line in people bailing out. Stephen Prothero at Boston U has identified massive religious illiteracy, not only for people not knowing about other religions, but people being virtually illiterate in their own nominal religion. So embedded in what you say is kind of a paradox where identity really is important. And when people introduce themselves to you at a place like Amherst, you're encouraged to talk about your identity and labels and so on. But the sign, the signifier, which used to represent something, a faith, a practice, a set of practices, a deposit of ethical knowledge, whatever, now stands alone. It's just a sign. It's an identity, but it doesn't necessarily get backed up by practice. And I'm wondering, I think you're absolutely right that religious knowledge is important. And I think you're absolutely right that people don't know enough about their fellow Americans. But at the same time, we are entering a set of years where millions of households are going to be created in the next 20 years with no faith affiliation, and they will raise children in that household with no faith affiliation. A cynic might observe that some of this is going to take care of itself the wrong way, because it's just going to be identity as an asserted label rather than actually having a couple of thousand years of heft behind it of something, a signifier that actually represents a something. I teach here. My 25 kids are going to leave knowing at the end of the semester all the stuff you were talking about. Are any of them here? No. Terrible. But they'll assert a label and then admit, almost sheepishly, some of them, that they don't really know what it means. While you're right, and I think you're absolutely right about the state of play, the only religions that are growing in this country are the post-1965 Immigration and Nationality Act religions. Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on.
Also Pentecostals and Mormons.
Mormons, yes. Pentecostals are changing churches, but they're not growing in absolute numbers. And the largest faith group in the United States, as it has been for 150 years, Roman Catholic, second largest nominally is ex-Catholics. 45 million ex-Catholics who normally don't become something else when they leave the Catholic Church. So the landscape is changing radically and quickly.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, very interesting, fascinating description of an important dynamic, right? Is this is there a specific question you have about that? I mean, one could go 100 directions with this,
Well, I
right? Is there-
asked my kids last week who was going to run the Methodist hospital if the trend lines on Methodism of the last 40 years continue for the next 40 years. Will it be something like the Y, where the Y grew up in a specific cultural context
Yep.
of
Christian youth movement.
yeah, and now, you know, you go there to swim and to lift weights and yoga and English as a second language and a lot of other things, but nobody goes to the Y for religious uplift. Very few people do.
So I'll make a couple quick comments about this. So number one, because I have family in Houston, and because they're teenage boys and they go to the Y a lot, I go to the Y with them, and there's Jesus stuff all over the Y in Katy, Texas. So it's possible. It's probably
There
true.
isn't in Logan Square
What?
in Chicago, where I was on the board of the Y.
Yeah.
You don't see Jesus
But
anywhere.
this is the point, right? This is exactly the point. That and I live 10 minutes from Logan Square. Okay, I live in
Good
North.
Y, I'm full of bananas.
Right, it is. I grew up at the Y. I grew up at the BRYLY in Glen Ellen. So there's many directions we could go with this, but one is a regional direction, right? So Katy, Texas is not rural Oklahoma. Katy, Texas is a professional upper middle class suburb of Houston, that is like Naperville in Chicago. And there's all this Jesus stuff at the Y. So I wonder, what's Birmingham, Alabama like? What's Dallas like? Right? What's Mississippi like? Is it more like this? So it's really interesting to disaggregate massive data by region, by race, by class, et cetera. So as Amherst dramatically diversifies by race, nation, and class, by the way, applause. I mean, that is a commitment that you all have made that, as far as I can tell, is very unique amongst kind of your echelon, right? It's hard to do, and you guys are doing it. Congratulations for that. My wild guess would be that if you were to disaggregate the Amherst population by race, income level, nationality, you would find that the students who are fourth generation Amherst, their religiosity on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 2. The kid who is first generation college, whose income level is under 80K, whatever, et cetera, that set of students, right, which is, again, massive hats off to you, 40, 50% of your campus. My guess is that population, their religiosity is a 7 of 10 or an 8 of 10. So tell me, what's Amherst culture? How's Amherst changing? If you're going to have those students, I could be wrong. Be interesting to run that though, right? And it'd be interesting to ask the question as the fourth generation Amherst kids in class talk about identity A, B, and C. Does it suggest to the first generation Amherst kid that they can't talk about identity D? It's not really stated. But the kids who know the place, they don't really talk about that. It's just a question, right? So I go to the Pacific Northwest with some frequency. People tell me all the time there, institution leader types, you're really here, you're like our once a year dose of religion is what they'll say, right? We're the most secular region in the country, like, right? And I'm like, there are 12 Muslim women in burqas, right? Ask them. Ask them, right? Disaggregate by race and income level. Come back and tell me how non-religious you are. So, there's a couple of other things. If you look at the Putnam data on American religiosity in the second half of the 20th century, in 1957, something like 70% of Americans said that religion was going to play a significant role in American life in the next decade. In 1967, something like 14% said America was going to play, religion was playing a significant role. In 1974, it had jumped back up to 50%. So it did one of these, right? I mean, like literally, you think about like the Summer of Love, you think there's a bunch of people there who are thinking religion is going to play a major role. But 10 years later, you have Bill Hybels and the Rick Warren and the Moral Majority. These are two separate movements. So you have a reemergence of American evangelicalism. Religion was supposed to be dead, and then evangelicals elected George W. Bush in 2000. Religion was supposed to be dead, and then evangelicals elected Donald Trump in 2016. Right? And religion has been declared dead in America a lot of times. Here's another point. To your Methodist Hospital point, 6 of the 9 agencies that the State Department contracts with to resettle refugees are religiously based. So let's say religion is dying. And let's say those places, which are supported by their denominations, like the Episcopal denomination gives millions of dollars a year to Episcopal refugee services. The Lutherans give millions of dollars a year to Lutheran refugee services. Let's say religion is dying and those places die. Who's going to replace them? Right? I ask like my progressive friends, are you going to start a refugee resettlement agency and do that blocking and tackling work? Right? Who's going to replace that? So what I mean is these trends, number one, as you well know, are complicated and complicated enough to be worthy of intellectual investigation. Number two, if they are true, we are in deep trouble as a civil society. If all those Catholic schools in urban areas go away, if all those Methodist hospitals go away, who's going to replace them? Yes. Yes.
Oh. I'll also introduce myself. My name is Aisha, and I'm also a Muslim, which is why I was snapping to what you were saying, because that's been a lot of my experiences. I've been working in my local mosque in Boston since I was around 14 years old, and I've really struggled I'm a very progressive Muslim, and as I become more progressive around issues of feminism, LGBTQ rights, anti-racism work, especially as you know in the Muslim community there's a lot of anti-black racism and also a lot of tribalism. I've really struggled with being seen as like a real person in my community, and oftentimes I've actually once interned at an interfaith organization last summer, and they told me that I wasn't a real Muslim because I was too progressive and that my views didn't represent my community, even though I am Muslim and I pray and everything. And so for me, I was wondering, as a fellow Muslim who is also progressive and who engages with interfaith work, how do you make sure people take you seriously, and also how because I'm trying to bring all this stuff. It's tough because I'm trying to bring all this stuff I'm learning in college back to my community, but sometimes they don't want to hear it, and but also when I try to do interfaith work, because to them I'm not the typical Muslim, they don't want to hear it either. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. Snap too. So there's a line that my musician friends say a lot to me. They say, the issue is not what you're playing. That's not what matters. What matters is what people are hearing. Right? So it's something that I'm giving this advice to myself. And so if any of it's useful for you, take the small piece that's useful, right? When I am organizing, which is to say when I'm trying to get other people to do something that I want them to do, what I have to figure out how to do is to take them from where they are at in language that they understand and resonate with, and encourage them to move closer to a place where I'd like them to be at, right? So in that process, it's not what I think I'm playing that matters. It's not if I think I'm saying everything the way that I want to say that matters. It's how they are hearing what I am saying that matters, right? Because I am not trying to communicate with myself, I'm trying to communicate with them. And I learned something in the process. I learned something about them, right? I learned something about this, the process of this. It's almost never the case where I move somebody from the place that they're at to the place exactly where I want them to go. I wind up moving a little bit. Maybe they wind up moving a little bit. Half the time I get it totally wrong, and I go home and I got to figure out how to do it again, right? But for me, the big thing is, this was a massive shift for me, right? If you'll permit a brief story here, very brief, right? For me, it's frankly, it's amongst my favorite stories in Islam. It's the story of the Prophet at Hudaybiyah. So I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. So the Prophet Muhammad is now in Medina. He's been hounded out of Mecca. He set up the Muslim community in Medina. He's done all sorts of beautiful things. There's been a set of battles that have been formed by the Meccans. And the Prophet decides it's time for peace. Okay? And what he does is he gathers the Muslims of Medina, and they come to Mecca as pilgrims. They have previously showed up vis-a-vis the Meccans as warriors. Now they come as pilgrims. They dress in the attire of pilgrims, the white cloths. Okay? And they stop at a place outside of Mecca called Hudaybiyah. And the people of Mecca who've done battle with the Muslims, they don't know what to do, because a part of the identity of the Meccans is they're the protectors of the Kaaba. They're the welcomers of pilgrims. So what do you do when a group of people you've done battle with show up as pilgrims, right? Like the Prophet is like, he's done a ninja trick on them, like a Jedi mind trick. Like seriously, right? It's brilliant. What do you do when the people who you battle with come as pilgrims? So the Meccans send a couple of their generals to deal with the Muslims, and they basically are like, "What are you doing?" And the Muslims say, "We've come to do the circumambulations around the Kaaba." I don't remember if it's Umrah or Hajj, but they've come to do the circumambulations around the Kaaba. And the Meccans are like, "No way." And the Muslims are like, "You are required to let us in. It is part of your ethical commitment to let us in." And they're debating this. And the Prophet Muhammad stands up and says, "Okay, we'll go home, but we're going to come back next year." And the Muslims look at him and they're like, "We came here to do this. They have to let us do this. We've got them cornered." The Prophet says, "No, we'll go home, but we'll come back next year. Deal?" And they draw up something called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, where they articulate like this set of things. You will leave now, you'll come back next year. If anybody is converted to Islam and wants to return to Mecca, any Muslim, they can return to Mecca. And by the way, we don't have to repatriate. In other words, it's a treaty that is stacked against the Muslims. Okay? And Ali and Umar, like the companions, the Sahaba, they're angry. They're like, "Are you kidding me? Like, we're giving away the store," right? And it comes time to sign the treaty, and one of the leaders of the Meccans looks at the treaty. He's about to sign, and he says that the co-signatory is Prophet Muhammad. And he says, "I'm not signing this." "Why aren't you signing this?" "Because if I recognized you as a prophet, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm not signing a treaty that says Prophet Muhammad." Ali and Umar they're like furious. They stand up, they have their hands on their swords, like this is it, right? Prophet Muhammad says, "Sit down." And he says, "Strike the term prophet from the treaty." And Ali and Umar are silent. And Prophet says, "Strike the term. I told you, strike the term prophet." And they can't bring themselves to do it. It is a direct command from their spiritual leader, and they can't bring themselves to do it. And Prophet Muhammad says, "Give me the pen. Show me where it says prophet in the treaty." He can't read. He's illiterate. He can't even see where it says prophet. Show me where it says it. And he strikes it himself. And they turn around and they go home. And you know what? They won. The next year, they come back and they do the circumambulations and they enter the city of Mecca in peace. And the Meccans in droves convert to Islam. He won. sometimes you show up as a pilgrim, right?
Thank you so much for being here for this talk. I have a question and a quick comment. The comment is related to your suggestions about some of the religious influence on American history and the important things that people should really know about, which I totally agree with. And I would add a really big one to that, which is John Brown and Calvinism, which there's a great book by David Reynolds and a number of other books about John Brown, some of which are completely historically inaccurate. But the Reynolds book actually just really got me thinking about the place of John Brown's religion and absolutely everything that he undertook, including his violence, in a way that I think is really central to our history. And the question really has to do, it's kind of amazing that like all of the previous questions point towards this. And what I'm hearing a lot and thinking about is sort of the need for almost as much intra-religious pluralism as inter-religious pluralism, which in some ways seems more complicated to me, you know, really drawing on this like issue that people face and not being a sort of outwardly typical example of their own religion, or you know, being in a position of trying to fight for some change. And I just wonder if that's out there. I wonder if people are really talking about that, or if, you know, how you think that the work you're doing could be applied.
So that's a great question. And at IFYC, the organization that I run and my colleague and friend Noah is a part of, we have a geeky language for this. You can tell that we carry the baggage of graduate school. We call it, what we're interested is in nurturing positive interactions between people who orient around religion differently. So Muslims and Jews orient around religion differently, but Sufis and Salafis orient around religion differently, right? So the notion, and that's kind of taken a little bit from Cantwell Smith, right? But it's the orientations around religion which fall in a range of categories: believer, non-believer, amongst different world religions, amongst different theological interpretations within religions, and amongst other kinds of identity groups like Black theology, or the Black church, feminist theology, et cetera, right? So how do you have positive interactions between people who orient around religion? It's a model that's wrong, but I hope is useful. So we're gonna do a couple more questions, and then, so allow over here, here, let's get all of you in the room, and I'm gonna answer the easiest question.
Thank you for your illuminating talk about the importance of religious diversity. So during the lunch discussion, you mentioned the best thing that we as students of Amherst can do is to create a youth interfaith group. And my question is, how can we raise that awareness and make people interested in this subject? Because as Professor Suarez mentioned, a lot of people who identify as nuns and unidentified in terms of religion are genuinely disinterested in even learning about other religions. So that's kind of a challenge to bring the notion of commonality with people who don't identify with anything. So how can we bring that and, you know, create a commonality and bring that interfaith notion?
This is my favorite question. You want to know why it's my favorite question? Because some really smart young person at every college or conference I go to asks the question. And it's been asked so many times that I think, have an answer that is wrong, but I hope useful. Okay? Here is that answer. It is not their job to be interested. It is your job to get them interested. The definition of a leader, by definition, is somebody who is interested in something that other people are not interested in. And the task of a leader is to figure out stories and questions and activities and processes and formats that gets people interested, right? So, you know, one of the analogies I like to use a lot is when the mountain climber comes to the mountain, she doesn't say, "What the heck are you doing here?" Right? Thank you for liking that. I appreciate that. This is like my favorite, right? So that's the mountain of a leader, is getting other people interested. Do you see what I'm saying? So the point that I'm making is I can't help you with that, right? You got to figure out what are the activities that I do, what are the stories that I tell, what are the processes that I create that interests a whole set of people in this. You see what I mean? Like that's your job. And the reason I suggest starting an interfaith group is because that is a good container from which you can make attempts at doing this. And then when you're successful, you have something to put those people in for the time being. Come to this meeting of our group on Tuesday night. President Biddy Martin has given us a budget of $40,000 and we have caviar. Thank you. You see what I mean? So it's something of a reframing of your question, right? The reason I say that, to kind of beat a dying horse here, is when people ask that question, they're assuming that they are born on top of the mountain, right? And you're not. You're born at the foot of the mountain. By definition, you care about something that other people don't care about. Your job is to get them to care about it. That is your task. You're like, that didn't help at all.
I studied religion in college because I was interested in belief as a material force, that what we believe does in fact shape society. We can look at the history books and see that, but that it's not always directly tied to identity. You can have belief without being part of a religion. You've spoken about religion and identity as if they are the same thing most of this evening, but I see belief remodeling the landscape all the time, and often it is happening outside of identity or across identities, yet it is at least as powerful and sometimes more powerful and often more insidious because it isn't held within the container of recognizable religious structures. People can get rights or discrimination based on their beliefs if there is a religious structure around it, but a belief system operating outside of that doesn't have either of those things. And in public places, such as a hospital or a school, when those beliefs clash, it's usually the person with the most identity clout who wins. Identity becomes a weapon. I wondered if you could speak to that difference, the belief and the identity difference, and how the cooperation and the conflict you're talking about applies through that lens.
Yeah. I mean, this is a PhD thesis. You know you have to go to grad school in this now, right? What's that? So, I mean, lots of people who are a lot smarter than me have tried to delineate this. My favorite scholar on this is Cantwell Smith. He writes a book called The Meaning and End of Religion, where he basically defines three things, right? Belief, faith, and tradition. I actually think faith and tradition for me are the most useful terms he defines. Basically, by the way, like I'm the kind of person who's like, okay, define the term and use it that way, and then try not to talk about it that much, right? Which is why that's my. Like, I run a nonprofit organization for a living, right? So that's how we operate at IFYC. So here's our definition, right? So a religion is a cumulative historical tradition. Christianity is a cumulative historical tradition which includes texts and symbols and architecture and poems and philosophy and ethics. It is the range of things that Christians have done over the 2,000 some odd years of Christianity, especially the things that communities have remembered over the course of time and have somehow saved. The faith of a Christian is the relationship that individual or community has with the tradition. Right? So the reason you have different theological communities is because different people emphasize different things in the tradition, right? So I would take up Cantwell Smith. He's an exceptional writer, The Meaning and End of Religion. He defines this set of things, right? And see if you agree and use the terms that way if you do, and if not, write a book in response, right? But those are useful, and you're absolutely right. Like I privilege in my discourse the role that religion plays in civic life. So I don't talk very much about individualized spirituality. It's not that I don't think it's important. It's just that it's not what we do at IFYC, right? I don't talk very much about belief, right? I talk about how people who call themselves religious form into communities that do things like start YMCAs. I talk about people, how Orthodox Jewish women would request, because of their particular belief system or how it manifests in a community, women-only swimming hours. And I ask the question, how would we handle this situation in our civic life? So that's the part I focus on. Doesn't mean it's the most important part, it's just the part that I focus on. All right, final question. Actually, okay, so I'm really gonna go bang, bang, bang here. We'll get all these voices in the room and then we'll tie this up. So I think there was your hand up was first. So here, and then we'll end with you.
Okay, so I have two things. One is I want to broaden the lens a little bit about what you were just talking about belief as a thing that's being reformed outside the container of organized religion. Some years ago, I was working at a nonprofit, and I was a member of the union at the nonprofit, and I was assigned the role in the union of being the diversity officer. And I'm very interested in the topic of interfaith discussions around religion, so I said to my fellow union members, hey, let's have a conversation about religion. And one of my colleagues came to me and spoke to me privately, and she said, well, I'm tentatively interested in this conversation about religion, but I need you to understand something about my religion, which is that my religion is being vegetarian. It is my deepest spiritual belief. It affects every choice I make in my life. And it's really, really important to me. And I have again and again the experience of being dismissed, marginalized, and scoffed at because of my vegetarianism, when it's actually my deepest religious belief. And so I'm afraid to go into this conversation because I feel so vulnerable. So that's what's happening to our frame around religion in our time and our generations that are living here in this culture now. So that's one piece. And the other piece is that vulnerability. And so one of the things that I want to have be part of this conversation is what's happening in that moment when people are saying to you, you're not Muslim enough because you're not center of the road enough and we don't want to talk to you. What's happening when people are dismissing someone that doesn't have the religious frame that they think is the real religious frame. And what I think is happening is it's about vulnerability. There's something about having your identity and their identity and your belief system be so different and so hard to imagine, and us being in such a big rush all the time that we can't just sit back and say, okay, let's just be with each other and hear. What is it like to be the parent of a child who's becoming a shaman? What does that feel like to be like, I have to support this child becoming this shaman, and it's terrifying, maybe she'll die. What does it feel like to be there? I'm a doctor, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to experience that. So I just want to put that into this conversation.
Great. Thank you for that.
Well, I retired from Amherst after being here for 25 years, and I think that at one point I was fortunate enough to have met a woman who perhaps knew how you begin to get people interested in something that they have no idea that they're interested in. So the way that she did it was this. She was a member of the administration, and I was talking to her one day about, I don't know what, but some issue that was going on. And she said to me kind of out of the blue, have you ever gone to an African-American worship service? And I said, no. And she said, you would love it. You should come the next time that there is one. And I did. And that opened a door for me that I don't think would have ever been opened any other way. Through that one worship service, and because of that one person, I think the whole world came to me. I have never had to travel around the world. I just sat here at Amherst College and let the whole world come to me. I thought, you know who I'm talking about? Yes.
It's one great way.
And I think that was one great way. And I think that if every person could somehow have an experience that would be something like the experience I had, the world would immediately become a better place. Because I got to know people of all kinds of religions, all kinds of nationalities, every possible color or shade, because I don't know if I believe in color. And so you start out with some small thing, and the next thing you know, your whole world has changed.
Thank you for that. Take notes on that. Take us out.
narrative and storytelling aspects. And I was wondering, what have you been observed or witnessed around how to address the issue and bringing the fragmented identities to in this era of bringing more awareness around not only religion per se, but also the quality of the character development in terms of greater humanity and coexistence context.
So, thank you for that. I'm going to connect 1, 2, 3, 4 very quickly, right? And I'm going to say that I think the task of an interfaith leader, right, which is the title of this book out there also, first you got to get people interested in this, right? And, bringing them to encouraging them to have a set of experiences is one way to get them interested. You got to figure out how to get people interested. Once they're interested, you got to figure out a space where people with not only different identities, but different types of identities, right? What I think it was Isaiah Berlin famously called incompatible and incommensurable, both things that are in conflict and also things that can't be compared. How do you create a space where they're having a fruitful conversation or doing a fruitful activity? What does that space look like? How do you get somebody who says their religion is vegetarianism to talk to somebody saying, I'm studying for the priesthood, right? Do they look at each other and say, actually, this is apples and orangutans. These aren't the same thing at all. Well, it's your job as the interfaith leader to set up the space. How do you do that? How do you get them interested? How do you set up the space? And then what do you call it, right? How do you tell the story of that space? And you'll see kind of a virtuous circle here, which is the more people you get interested, the more you will find people helping you set up the space, right? The more that you will be able to tell the story of it, the more people who will be interested, the larger and warmer the space will become, the easier the story will come, right? This is not easy work to do, but there is a virtuous circle, right? Which is to say, you get things moving, you get your little interfaith group at Amherst or Mount Holyoke or et cetera started, you figure out a couple of activities to do, right? You go to the Interfaith Leadership Institute, thank you for wearing the gear, right? You figure out some things to do and you watch it grow. You watch it grow. Thank you for a wonderful day and evening.